You stand in the heart of London at the base of the column dedicated to Nelson. The roar of traffic fades into a dull hum as you look up at the bronze lions. Close your eyes and feel the pavement beneath your boots. Imagine the ground becoming transparent, peeling away the granite and asphalt like layers of skin. Below the bustling tourists lies a world forgotten by the sun. You are standing on the edge of an ancient riverbank where, tens of thousands of years ago, lions of a different kind roamed. Beneath this square, the bones of hippos and elephants rest in the cold clay, relics of a tropical swamp that predates the city itself. Further down, hidden vaults and secret tunnels snake through the darkness. Today, you are going to travel straight down into the hidden depths of the most famous landmark in London. You stand in the center of the world. Not the geographic center, perhaps, but the emotional heart of London. The air around you is thick with the unique scent of the city. It is a mixture of damp stone, the metallic tang of bus brakes, and the faint, sweet smell of roasted nuts from a nearby vendor. You feel the vibration of the city pulsing through the soles of your shoes as thousands of people move around you. They are rushing to catch the underground, heading into the National Gallery to see a masterpiece, or simply drifting through the open space. This is Trafalgar Square. It is a place defined by its vastness and its verticality. Your eyes are naturally drawn upward, following the gray granite line of Nelson Column as it pierces the low, silver clouds of the London sky. But before you focus on the heights, look at your feet. You are standing on acres of paving stones that have been worn smooth by millions of footsteps over nearly 2 centuries. You might notice a few pigeons landing nearby, pecking at nothing in particular. Today, the pigeons are fewer than they once were. Not so long ago, they were the undisputed rulers of this pavement. There were thousands of them, a living gray carpet that would rise in a deafening flurry of wings if a child ran through the center. People used to sell bags of birdseed here, and tourists would stand with their arms outstretched, covered in birds, capturing a quintessential London photograph. Those birds are the silent witnesses to the square. They have seen every protest, every celebration, and every quiet dawn for generations. They know every crack in the stone and every ledge of the monuments. As you look around, you realize that this space feels permanent, as if it has always been the clearing in the forest of London buildings. But that is an illusion. To understand what lies beneath, you first have to understand what was cleared away to make room for this grand stage. Imagine the square as it was 500 years ago. You would not be standing in a wide, open plaza. Instead, you would be surrounded by the smells of a stable. This was the site of the Royal Mews. For centuries, the kings and queens of England kept their hawks and later their horses right where you are standing. The term mews comes from the word to mew, or to molt, because the royal falcons were kept here while they shed their feathers. Later, the falcons were replaced by the rhythmic thumping of hooves and the smell of fresh hay as the royal stables took over the site. It was a crowded, busy, and likely very dirty place. The transformation of this area into the grand square you see today was a slow and messy process. It began in the early 19th century when the architect John Nash envisioned a grand opening that would connect the royal parks to the rest of the city. He wanted to sweep away the cramped alleyways and the aging stables to create something that reflected the power of the British Empire. By the 1830s, the stables were gone, and the space was a muddy, empty construction site. It was named Trafalgar Square to commemorate the great naval victory of 1805, where Admiral Horatio Nelson defeated the combined French and Spanish fleets. Now look up at the column again. It is the defining feature of this space. You see the massive pillar of Dartmoor granite rising 169 feet into the air. At the very top stands Nelson himself, looking out toward the sea he once commanded. He is small from this distance, only about 18 feet tall, carved from Craigleith sandstone. If you could fly like one of the pigeons and sit on his shoulder, you would see that he is missing his right arm and his right eye is scarred, just as he was in life. But think about the logistics of putting him there. In 1843, before the statue was hauled up to its perch, the builders did something extraordinary. They hosted a dinner party on top of the column. 14 men sat around a table at the very summit, toast after toast ringing out over the rooftops of London. They ate steak and drank ale while suspended hundreds of feet in the air, celebrating the completion of a structure that many thought was a foolish engineering risk. When you look at the pillar today, try to imagine those men laughing in the wind, knowing that they were standing on a pedestal that would become the most famous landmark in the city. At the base of the column, you see the 4 great bronze lions. They look as though they have been there for an eternity, guarding the admiral with a silent, heavy dignity. Each one is 20 feet long and 11 feet tall. But these lions were a source of great frustration for the Victorian public. The column was finished in 1843, but the lions did not arrive until 1867. For over 20 years, the stone plinths stood empty. The government struggled to find an artist who could capture the majesty they required. Eventually, they turned to Edwin Landseer, a famous painter known for his depictions of animals. Landseer had never sculpted in bronze before. He spent years studying the anatomy of lions. Legend has it that he even requested a dead lion from the London Zoo so he could study its muscles and frame in his studio. He kept the decomposing carcass for so long that his neighbors complained about the smell, and the lion eventually became so bloated that he had to rely on his imagination for the final details. This is why, if you look closely at the lions today, some people say their paws look more like the paws of a giant dog or a cat than a real lion. They are smooth and heavy, worn down by generations of children who have climbed onto their backs for a photo. As you walk past the lions, you hear the crashing sound of the fountains. They are magnificent, throwing plumes of water high into the air that catch the light and spray a fine mist over the crowds. But the fountains were not originally built just for beauty. In the mid-19th century, Trafalgar Square was a notorious gathering place for protesters and the dissatisfied poor of London. The authorities were worried about the large, flat open space. They feared it was too perfect for a revolution. The fountains were installed specifically to break up the paved area, making it harder for a massive crowd to gather in a single, solid block. They were a beautiful form of crowd control. The water you see dancing today started as a way to keep the people of London from standing too close together. But here is where the mystery begins to deepen. All of this weight, the thousands of tons of granite, the bronze lions, the massive statue of Nelson, and the millions of gallons of water in the fountain basins, must be supported by something. As you stand on the paving stones, you are actually standing on the roof of another world. If you look toward the edges of the square, you might see small iron grates or heavy wooden doors set into the stone. You might notice the way the ground slopes down toward the National Gallery or the steps that lead into the shadows of the surrounding buildings. The square is not a solid block of earth. It is a shell. Beneath your feet, the ground is honeycombed with history. There are ancient riverbeds that have been diverted and forgotten. There are the foundations of the royal stables that were never truly removed, but simply built over. There are tunnels that connect government buildings, secret bunkers designed for times of war, and even the remains of creatures that lived here long before London was a city. You see a red bus pull up to a stop at the edge of the square. The engine rumbles and you feel that vibration again. It is a reminder that the surface is just a thin skin. The pigeons see the square from the air, and we see it from the ground, but very few people ever see what lies beneath the granite and the bronze. We think of the square as a place of light and open air, but its secrets are buried in the dark, held in the cold grip of the London clay. You start to walk toward the north side of the square, toward the grand portico of the National Gallery. The noise of the fountains fades slightly, replaced by the sound of a street performer playing a violin. As you move, you pass over a series of unassuming metal covers in the ground. Most people walk right over them without a second thought. But if you stop and listen, really listen, you might hear a sound that does not belong in a public square. It is not the sound of traffic or tourists. It is a low, rhythmic hum, the sound of machinery and air being pushed through confined spaces. The Pillar of Nelson and the pigeons that circle it are the public face of this place. They are what the world sees on postcards. But the true story of Trafalgar Square is a story of layers. Each century has added a new level, burying the one that came before. The stable hands of the king, the builders of the column, and the engineers of the modern city have all left their mark, and most of those marks are now hidden from view. You are standing on a trapdoor of history. Everything you see around you, the lions, the fountains, and the great granite column, is just the beginning. To find the real secrets, we have to look past the stone and the bronze. We have to go down. We have to leave the sunlight and the open air behind and descend into the places where the light of day never reaches. The tour of the surface is over. It is time to see what the pigeons can never see. It is time to discover what is hiding right under your feet. You are standing on the hard, gray pavement of Trafalgar Square. The air is filled with the smell of diesel exhaust and the persistent, low hum of London traffic. Tourists are swirling around you, and the stone lions of Nelson columns sit silent and immovable. But now I want you to close your eyes. Imagine the sound of the buses fading away, replaced by a silence so heavy it feels like a physical weight. The cold stone beneath your boots begins to soften, turns to damp soil, then to thick, sucking mud. The temperature drops, then rises, then drops again as the clock of the world begins to spin backward at a dizzying speed. You are falling through the layers of the earth. You pass through the Victorian sewers, past the foundations of ancient churches, and deep into the dark, compressed gravels that have sat undisturbed for thousands of centuries. When you finally open your eyes and step forward, the city of London is gone. There is no National Gallery. There is no Charing Cross. Instead, you are standing on the edge of a vast, braided river system. This is the ancient Thames, but it is not the narrow, walled-in river you know. It is miles wide, a shifting labyrinth of sandbars, marshes, and deep, slow-moving channels. The air is thick and humid. It feels more like a tropical savanna than the gray, drizzly London you left behind. You wipe the sweat from your forehead and look around. This is the Ipswickian interglacial period, roughly 125,000 years ago. In this pocket of time, the Earth has warmed significantly. The massive ice sheets that once covered the North have retreated, leaving behind a lush, green world. This is a time when London was not a city, but a paradise for creatures that seem entirely alien to this latitude today. You hear a splashing sound to your left. You turn and see a massive shape rising from the reeds of a muddy creek, right where the entrance to the tube station would be in your time. It is a hippopotamus. It shakes its head, spraying river water into the sunlight, and lets out a deep, resonant grunt that vibrates in your chest. In this era, hippos are not exotic animals from a distant continent. They are local residents of the London Basin. They swim in the warm waters of the Thames, grazing on the lush vegetation that grows along the banks. It is difficult to imagine, as you stand there, that the very soil beneath the National Portrait Gallery once held the bones of these African giants, buried by the shifting sands of a prehistoric river. As you walk further along the muddy shore, the ground beneath you trembles. You look up and see a shadow that blots out the sun. It is a straight-tusked elephant. This creature is a giant, even by the standards of the modern African elephants you have seen in documentaries. It stands nearly 14 feet tall at the shoulder. Its tusks are nearly 10 feet long and almost perfectly straight, pointing forward like lances. It moves with a slow, rhythmic grace, its massive feet sinking into the soft silt. This is the animal whose bones were discovered by workers in the mid-20th century. In 1958, while excavating for the foundations of South Africa House on the eastern side of the square, laborers were stunned to find the remains of these behemoths. They were reaching across a gulf of over 100,000 years, touching the ivory and bone of a world that existed before the first human ever dreamed of building a city. You find yourself marveling at the sheer scale of the life around you. The segment title mentioned giant sloths, and while the true giant ground sloths like Megatherium were kings of the Americas, the spirit of those massive, slow-moving wonders is everywhere here in the form of the megafauna that once dominated Europe. You spot a herd of narrow-nosed rhinoceroses moving through the tall grass, their skin thick and folded like armor. Above them, a giant deer, the megaloceros, lifts its head. Its antlers span 12 feet from tip to tip. It is a crown of bone so heavy it seems impossible for the animal to carry, yet it moves through the brush with a delicate, regal ease. But the warmth of this interglacial paradise is an illusion in the grand scale of history. Time begins to move again, faster now. The lush greens of the valley start to pale. The humid air turns brittle and dry. The hippos, sensing the change, move south, following the warmth as it retreats toward the equator. The great elephants vanish, leaving only their massive bones to be encased in the rising layers of gravel. The world is growing cold. You wrap your arms around yourself as the wind begins to bite. This is the transition into the Devonian glaciation, the last great ice age. The landscape transforms before your eyes. The river slows as the water is locked away in growing ice caps to the north. The trees wither and die, replaced by a vast, treeless tundra. The horizon is no longer softened by forests, but is sharp and jagged under a pale, unforgiving sun. You are now standing in a world of white and gray. To the north, just a few hundred miles away, a wall of ice thousands of feet thick is grinding its way across the landscape. It is a glacier, a slow-moving mountain of frozen water that carries with it boulders the size of houses. It never quite reaches the spot where you stand at Trafalgar Square, but its presence is felt in every freezing gust of wind. This is a periglacial environment. The ground beneath your feet is no longer mud. It is permafrost, frozen solid for hundreds of feet down. In the summer, the very top inch of the soil thaws, turning the surface into a treacherous, boggy mess of meltwater and silt. This is how the treasures beneath the square were preserved. When an animal died on this frozen plain, its body was quickly swallowed by the shifting gravels and the heavy, mineral-rich silts washed down by the seasonal floods. The cold acted like a natural tomb, protecting the bones from scavengers and the elements, pressing them into the earth until they became part of the geology itself. You see a different kind of life now, built for this harsh reality. A woolly mammoth treks across the horizon, its long, shaggy coat blowing in the gale. It is a creature of the cold, a sentinel of the frost. Beside it, you might imagine the massive cave lions that prowled these icy wastes, their breath blooming like clouds of steam in the air. These lions were larger than any alive today, and their bones, too, were found beneath the square, mixed with the remains of the very animals they hunted. Think about the workers in the 1950s and 60s. They were digging into the ground to expand the basement of the National Gallery and to reinforce the foundations of the buildings that surround the square. They expected to find pipes, maybe some Roman pottery, or the foundations of medieval tenements. Instead, their shovels struck something hard and white. When they brushed away the London clay and the ancient river gravel, they found the enormous, curved rib of a hippopotamus. They found the massive, grinding molars of an elephant. The fossils found here tell a story of extreme climate change. In one layer, you have the hippopotamus, which requires a climate where the rivers never freeze in winter. Just a few feet above or below that layer, you might find the remains of a reindeer or a woolly rhinoceros, animals that thrived in the biting cold of the tundra. This vertical map of time shows us that the ground beneath Trafalgar Square has been many different worlds. It has been a sun-drenched riverbank where lions stalked their prey, and it has been a frozen, wind-swept desert where the only sound was the howling of the wind over the ice. You stand there in the center of this frozen tundra, feeling the immense weight of time. Beneath the asphalt of the modern world, beneath the sewers and the cables and the subway tunnels, these layers of history are stacked like the pages of a book. The layer you are standing on now, this icy, wind-swept plain, is just one chapter. The warm, hippo-filled river was the chapter before it. As you watch, the ice begins to retreat. The climate swings back, the sun grows stronger, and the glaciers melt, releasing a torrent of water that carves new paths through the landscape. The tundra gives way to birch forests, then to oak and elm. The modern Thames begins to take its familiar shape, settling into its bed. The animals of the deep past are gone, replaced by smaller, more familiar creatures. And eventually, a new animal arrives, one that walks on two legs and carries fire and tools. You see the first hunters moving through the brush, following the tracks of deer. They have no idea that beneath their feet lie the bones of giants. They do not know about the elephants or the hippos. They only know the world as it is for them. This is the beauty of the ground beneath Trafalgar Square. It is a silent witness to the extreme shifts of our planet. It has been a tropical swamp, a frozen wasteland, and a lush forest, all before a single stone was laid for the city of London. You feel the ground begin to firm up again. The biting wind of the Ice Age softens into the familiar, damp breeze of a London afternoon. The white tundra bleeds back into the gray stone of the square. The sound of the traffic returns, a low roar that grows until it fills your ears. You open your eyes. You are back in the present. The lions of the monument are still there, made of bronze and stone. But now, when you look at them, you might think of the real lions that once hunted in the tall grass right where that red bus is idling. You might look at the fountains and imagine a hippopotamus surfacing in the spray. The pavement beneath your feet feels different now. It is no longer just a floor, it is a lid. It is a thin, modern crust sitting on top of a deep, prehistoric mystery. The bones are still down there. Some were taken to museums, carefully labeled and placed under glass, but many more remain. They are nestled in the gravel, cradled by the silt of an ancient river, resting in the dark just a few meters below the heavy tread of millions of people. You realize that the history of London does not start with the Romans or the Celts. It starts with the geology. It starts with the shifting ice and the wandering giants who called this place home long before it had a name. As you walk across the square, every step you take is a journey through time. You are walking on the remains of an era when the world was wild and the climate was a powerful, unpredictable force that dictated the survival of everything. The glaciers and the giants are gone, but they left their mark in the soil, a secret map of a lost world waiting for someone to dig deep enough to find it. The city above is loud and busy, but the world below is silent, ancient, and filled with the ghosts of a time when London was a land of ice and monsters. You take one last look at the grand buildings surrounding you. They seem so permanent, so solid. But you know better now. You know that they are just the latest layer in a story that is still being written. A story that began with the slow crawl of glaciers and the heavy footsteps of the giants who once ruled the earth. The past is not gone. It is simply waiting, just beneath your feet, for the next time the earth decides to shift and reveal its secrets. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the square. The light hits the stone columns and the bronze statues, giving them a golden glow. It is the same sun that once warmed the backs of those straight-tusked elephants and glittered off the ice of the retreating glaciers. The connection is there if you know how to look for it. You turn and head toward the street, leaving the square behind, but you carry the weight of those ancient years with you. You have seen what lies beneath, and the city will never look quite the same again. The pavement is just a thin veil. Beneath it, the wild heart of the ancient world is still beating, locked in the stone and the soil, a reminder of where we came from and the incredible journey the earth has taken to bring us to this moment. You are a traveler in time, and you have only just begun to scratch the surface of the mysteries hidden in the dark, silent depths of the London earth. The giants may be sleeping, but their story is very much alive. It is a story of resilience, of an earth that breathes in ice and exhales in heat, shifting the very ground we stand on until it is unrecognizable. Every time a new skyscraper is anchored into the London clay, or a new tunnel is bored through the gravel, we are poking a hole into this prehistoric world. We are reminding ourselves that our time here is just a thin layer of dust on top of an epic saga of predators and prey, of ice and sun. The giant sloths of the imagination and the very real elephants of the square are part of a lineage that stretches back into the deep dark of the planet's history. As you leave the square, the noise of the city rises to meet you, but in the back of your mind, you can still hear the distant trumpeting of an elephant and the crunch of snow beneath a mammoth's feet. You have walked through the glaciers and stood among the giants. Now it is time to see what happened when the ice finally left for good, and a new kind of creature began to leave its mark on this ancient ground. The story of what lies beneath is moving closer to the surface, and the human era is about to begin. Close your eyes for a moment and forget the vibration of the tour buses. Forget the sound of the fountains and the chatter of thousands of tourists. Imagine the heavy, humid silence of a world where the air smells not of exhaust and roasted nuts, but of salt, decaying reeds, and the sharp, mineral scent of wet flint. You are standing in the center of what will one day be Trafalgar Square, but the ground beneath your feet is unrecognizable. It is not paved with stone or leveled by engineers. Instead, you are standing on a gentle rise of gravel and silt, looking out over a landscape that is more water than land. The year is roughly 6,000 years before the Common Era. The great ice sheets that once dominated the north have retreated, and the world has warmed. The massive mammoths and straight-tusked elephants you might have encountered in an earlier age are gone, replaced by a dense, pulsing ecosystem of wetlands. This is the Mesolithic era, a time of transition where the Earth is finding its new shape. You are standing in the heart of the Thames Basin, a vast, low-lying bowl that catches the runoff of a much wilder, much more unpredictable river than the one we know today. As you look toward the south, where the Houses of Parliament would eventually stand, you do not see a river confined by stone embankments. Instead, you see the Thames as it truly was, a braided monster. It is a mile wide in places, a chaotic network of shifting channels, sandbars, and emerald islands. The water is clear but dark, stained by the tannins of fallen trees. It moves with a slow, heavy pulse, governed by the tides that push up from the sea. Twice a day, the water rises, flooding the lowlands and turning the area around you into a shimmering inland sea. Twice a day, it recedes, leaving behind a glistening expanse of mud and tidal flats. You decide to walk toward the water, but the going is difficult. The ground is a treacherous mix of what geologists call the taplow gravels and thick layers of brick earth. Beneath the thin carpet of moss and grass, the earth is a sponge. Every step you take produces a wet, sucking sound as the mud tries to claim your footwear. You are walking through a transition zone. To your left, the land rises slightly toward the hills of the north, covered in a burgeoning forest of oak, hazel, and elm. To your right, the land falls away into the marshes. The vegetation here is overwhelming in its density. You are surrounded by towering stands of common reed and bulrushes that rise over your head. They hiss and whisper as the wind catches them, a sound like falling rain that never stops. In the wetter patches, you see the silver bark of willow trees and the dark, knotted trunks of alders. These are the colonizers of the marsh, trees that love to have their feet in the water. Their roots reach down into the silt of the Thames, binding the shifting mud together and creating the very foundations that humans will eventually build upon. Listen closely to the sounds around you. It is far from quiet. The marshes are a cathedral of bird life. You hear the deep, booming call of a bittern hidden in the reeds, a sound so low it feels like a vibration in your chest. Overhead, a pair of white-tailed eagles circle the thermals, their massive wingspans casting long shadows over the mudflats. In the distance, you hear the splashing of a beaver building a lodge in one of the smaller creeks that feed into the main river. These animals are the architects of this landscape, damming the streams and creating the intricate network of ponds and lagoons that define the basin. You are not alone here, though it might feel like it. If you look closely at the muddy bank of a nearby stream, you might see a footprint that looks familiar. It is not the track of a deer or a wild boar, though there are plenty of those. It is the footprint of a human. These are the hunter-gatherers of the Mesolithic, and to them, this marshland is not a wasteland. It is a supermarket. They do not live in the square permanently. The land is too unstable for that. But they return here season after season. Imagine a small group of people moving through the reeds with the silence of predators. They are here for the spring fish runs, when the river teems with salmon and eels. They use spears tipped with tiny, razor-sharp pieces of flint, microliths that they have fashioned with incredible precision. They are also here for the plants. The marsh provides them with reed tubers, water lilies, and wild celery. For these people, the spot where Nelson's column will one day stand is a strategic high point, a place to camp for a few nights, build a small fire, and look out over the productive chaos of the river. You see the remains of one of their camps. It is nothing more than a circle of scorched earth and a few discarded hazelnut shells. They have used the dry gravel of the terrace to keep their feet out of the mud. There are no monuments here yet. No statues of kings or generals. The only monuments are the ancient oaks on the higher ground and the way the light reflects off the water at sunset. The air begins to cool as evening approaches, and a thick, white mist starts to roll in from the river. This is the famous Thames fog in its primal form. It swallows the reeds, the willows, and the distant hills until the world feels like it consists only of you and the small patch of ground you are standing on. You can smell the dampness, a heavy, earthy scent that speaks of thousands of years of accumulated silt. This silt is the secret to London's future. Over the millennia, the river has deposited layer upon layer of this fine, fertile mud. It is rich, heavy, and perfect for the farming that will eventually replace the wandering lifestyle of the hunter-gatherers. As you stand in the thickening mist, think about the geography of this specific spot. You are standing on the edge of a terrace. To the west, a small river called the Tyburn flows down from the hills of Hampstead, carving a valley through the landscape before it splits into two branches and spills into the Thames. One of those branches flows just a few hundred yards from where you are standing. This confluence of waters is why this place matters. It is a crossroads of liquid highways. The people who move through here are part of a vast network, trading flint and ideas along the banks of the river. The landscape is never still. You realize that the very ground under your feet is shifting. The Thames is a living thing, constantly eroding its banks and depositing new land elsewhere. The gravels you are standing on were brought here by the river in its more violent moods, during the great floods of the melting ice age. Now, they are being buried by the quiet, steady accumulation of marsh mud. This is the process of building the London basin one grain of silt at a time. You begin to move back toward the higher ground, away from the rising tide. As you climb the gentle slope that will one day be the site of the National Gallery, you look back one last time. The marshes of the Thames Basin are a place of incredible beauty and terrifying fragility. They are a wilderness that seems eternal, yet we know how the story ends. We know that these reeds will be cleared, these creeks will be paved over, and this wild, braided river will be forced into a straight, deep channel. But even today, if you go deep enough beneath the pavement of Trafalgar Square, you will find the evidence of this world. You will find the peat layers, the preserved remains of those ancient reeds, and the dark, heavy clay that remembers the touch of the tides. You will find the bones of the fish that swam through the drowned forests and the flint tools dropped by the people who watched the eagles fly over the marsh. The era of the wilderness is beginning to fade. The climate is stabilizing, and the humans who once passed through here as shadows are starting to stay longer. They are starting to shape the land rather than just moving with its rhythms. The wild marshland is about to become a landscape of purpose. The transformation of this damp, quiet basin into a center of human power is a slow process, measured in centuries, but the foundation has been laid. The silt is thick, the gravel is firm, and the river is waiting. You can almost feel the first tremors of the coming change, the transition from a world of water and wind to a world of stone and story. The human era is no longer just a possibility, it is becoming an inevitability, written in the very mud of the Thames. You stand today on the northeastern corner of Trafalgar Square, right where the heavy stone steps of St. Martin in the Fields rise to meet the sky. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the sound of the traffic, the humming of the tour buses, and the rhythmic splashing of the fountains begin to dissolve. The smell of hot asphalt and street food fades, replaced by something cooler, damp, and ancient. You are no longer standing on a paved plaza. Beneath your feet, the ground is soft, a mixture of gravel and dark, rich earth. The year is not 2024. It is the beginning of the 5th century, approximately the year 410. You are standing on a gentle rise, a small hill that overlooks the wide, shimmering expanse of the Thames to your south. To your east, about a mile away, you can see the distant, formidable stone walls of Londinium. That city is a dense, bustling Roman capital, but out here where you are standing, the air is quiet. You are in the countryside. This is the Roman frontier, the edge of the urban world. In the Roman mind, there was a strict line between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Law and custom dictated that no one could be buried within the city walls. And so, as you look around this quiet hillside, you realize you are standing in a city of the silent. To your left and right, lining the edge of a well-worn gravel track that leads toward the west, are graves. Some are simple mounds of earth. Others are marked by wooden posts. But one, located exactly where the Church of St. Martin stands today, is different. In 2006, while workers were preparing for a massive renovation of the church, they peeled back the modern layers of London and found something that rewrote the history of the square. They found a tomb. Not just any tomb, but a massive, shimmering block of white limestone. Imagine the scene as the archaeologists brushed away the last of the London clay to reveal the lid of a heavy sarcophagus. It had remained undisturbed for 16 centuries, resting just a few feet below the thousands of tourists who walk by every single day. Step closer to that open trench in your mind. The stone is Barnack limestone, a high-quality material brought all the way from Northamptonshire. Think about the labor required to move a block of stone weighing over 1.5 tons across the wild landscape of Roman Britain just to reach this specific hill. This was a statement of power and of status. This was someone who wanted to be remembered, even as the Roman Empire was beginning to crumble around them. As you look down at the sarcophagus, you are seeing a moment of transition. Inside that stone box lay the remains of a man. He was about 45 years old, a tall, sturdy figure for his time. He was not a local laborer. His bones and the quality of his burial suggest he was a man of significant wealth and perhaps administrative importance. But who was he? Why was he buried all the way out here, a mile from the city gates, overlooking the river? The Roman road you are standing near is the predecessor to what we now call the Strand and Whitehall. It was the main artery connecting the capital of Londinium to the west of the province. By burying this man here, his family was ensuring that every traveler, every merchant, and every soldier marching toward the setting sun would pass by his monument. In the Roman world, to be forgotten was the ultimate death. By placing his grave on the side of this busy thoroughfare, he remained a part of the conversation of the living. But look closely at the soil surrounding the tomb. There is a tension in the air. The year 410 is a pivotal moment. This is the year the Emperor Honorius sent a letter to the people of Britain telling them to look to their own defenses. The Roman legions were leaving. The administrative structure was shattering. The man in this grave lived through the end of an era. He might have been one of the last high-status Romans to be buried with full traditional honors before the lights went out on the province. As you walk around the perimeter of the burial site, you see other signs of Roman life beneath the square. Archaeologists found fragments of fine red pottery, known as Samian ware, and pieces of glass that once caught the sunlight in a Roman villa. There were Roman roof tiles and bits of mosaic scattered in the layers of earth. It suggests that this hill was not just a cemetery, but perhaps the site of a grand suburban estate. Imagine a wealthy Roman official sitting on a terrace where the National Gallery now stands, looking out over his gardens toward the river. sipping wine imported from the Mediterranean, while the empire he served slowly drifted into the shadows. The ground beneath you is a witness to the collapse of a civilization. When the Roman structure failed, this site did not simply disappear. It became a landmark. The presence of this high-status Roman burial may be the very reason the Church of St. Martin exists today. In the centuries after the Romans left, the memory of this sacred or significant spot likely lingered. Early Christians often built their chapels over Roman sites, repurposing the old stones and the old prestige for a new faith. Feel the dampness of the London fog as it rolls off the Thames, just as it did 1600 years ago. The silence of this Roman frontier is heavy. You are standing at the boundary between the ancient world and the medieval world that is yet to come. The man in the limestone coffin represents the final breath of Londinium as a Roman city. After him, the fields around Trafalgar Square would fall into a period of quiet, as the grand villas crumbled and the Roman roads became overgrown with weeds. But the story of the square does not end with the departure of the legions. Even as the Roman tiles were crushed into the mud, the site remained a focal point. You can sense the shift in the atmosphere. The organized, rigid world of the Roman frontier is fading, and something more chaotic, more vibrant, and more mysterious is beginning to take root in the soil. The gravel road you saw earlier is still there, but the travelers are different now. They are no longer wearing sandals and togas. The language you hear on the wind is changing from the sharp, rhythmic Latin to the guttural, earthy tones of the Germanic tribes. You are standing on a layer of history that is thick with the dust of the Roman collapse. Every time you walk across the modern paving stones of Trafalgar Square, you are hovering just a few feet above that limestone sarcophagus. You are walking over the bones of a man who saw the end of the world as he knew it. This wasn't just a grave, it was a frontier marker. It was the last outpost of an empire that thought it would last forever, buried in the very dirt that would one day support the heart of the British Empire. The significance of this find cannot be overstated. Before 2006, we thought the area around Trafalgar Square was largely empty during the Roman period. We thought the action was all further east. But this one grave, this one man in his stone box, changed everything. It proved that the square was a place of importance long before the Vikings, the Saxons, or the Normans ever set foot here. It was a place of ritual, a place of memory, and a place where the elite of the Roman world chose to spend eternity. Take a final look at that quiet hillside. The sun is setting over the Thames, and the shadows of the Roman monuments are stretching long across the grass. The frontier is silent for now, but the earth beneath you is restless. The Roman era is ending, but the story of what lies beneath is only just beginning to move into its next, even more crowded chapter. The mud of the Thames and the gravel of the hill are preparing to receive a new people, a new culture, and a new name. The frontier is about to become a center once again. You stand today in the center of a paved world. Beneath your boots are the granite slabs of the square, and below those, the thick concrete foundations that support the heavy statues of generals and the massive weight of the National Gallery. The air is filled with the scent of diesel fumes and toasted nuts from the street vendors. But if you could reach down and peel back those layers like the skin of an onion, you would find yourself plunging into a world that was forgotten for nearly 1,000 years. You are stepping back into the 7th century, a time when the Roman city of Londinium was nothing more than a ghost town of crumbling marble and ivy-strangled stone. Imagine that the roar of the traffic fades. The stone buildings around you dissolve into the earth. The sky opens up, and the ground beneath your feet becomes soft, dark river silt and rich, damp clay. You are no longer in a square. You are standing on a gentle slope that leads down to the northern bank of the Thames. This is the heart of Londonwick, the great trading port of the Anglo-Saxons. You walk through a narrow lane. There are no straight Roman lines here. The path you follow twists between small, rectangular houses made of timber and mud. The roofs are thatched with golden straw that smells of summer rain and smoke. Under your feet, the ground is a carpet of rushes and animal bones, the discarded remains of 1,000 meals. To your left, a woman sits outside her doorway. You watch her hands move with rhythmic precision as she works a loom. The clack of the bone weights hitting each other is a constant music in this neighborhood. She is weaving wool that was sheared from sheep grazing just a mile away, perhaps on the very hills where the British Museum stands today. As you move further into the settlement, the air changes. It becomes thick with the scent of wood smoke from 100 hearths. You see blacksmiths hammering at glowing iron and potters spinning wheels to create the thick, gray vessels that will hold ale and water. This is not a place of grand monuments. It is a place of industry, noise, and life. You are in a city of wood. For centuries, historians were baffled by what happened after the Romans left Britain in the early 5th century. They looked at the old Roman walls, the ones that still define the square mile of the city of London today, and they found almost nothing from the Saxon period. It seemed as though London had simply ceased to exist. But they were looking in the wrong place. They were looking behind the walls. You, however, are standing in the middle of the truth. The Saxons did not want the old Roman city. They found the stone ruins cold, haunting, and difficult to maintain. They called them the work of giants, and they preferred to build fresh. They chose this spot, the area we now call the Strand and Trafalgar Square, because the riverbank here was shallow and sandy. It was the perfect place to beach their shallow-bottomed trading ships. You walk down toward the water. The Thames is wider here than you remember it, and much more wild. There are no embankments to hold it back. The tide pulls the water far out, exposing long stretches of mud where children scavenge for lost trinkets. You see a ship pulling in. It is not a Viking longship, not yet. This is a merchant vessel from the continent. You hear the shouts of men speaking in Frisian and Old English, bartering over crates of amber from the Baltic, wine from the Rhineland, and fine glass from the Frankish kingdoms. You realize that this spot, where tourists now snap photos of the lions, was once one of the most important international ports in Northern Europe. As you wander through this ghost city, you notice that the houses are built over deep pits. These are not basements. These are sunken floored buildings, where the hollowed-out earth provides insulation against the biting winter winds. In the 1980s, when archaeologists were called in to excavate the area around the National Gallery, they found the footprints of these very houses. They found the post holes where the great oak timbers once stood. They found the trash pits of the people you are watching now. You stop to look at a small pile of refuse near a doorway. To an archaeologist, this is a treasure trove. You see a discarded comb made from deer antler, its teeth worn smooth from years of use. There is a broken loom weight, a small bronze pin shaped like a bird, and a handful of oyster shells. The people of Londonwick loved oysters. They were the fast food of the 7th century, cheap and plentiful in the brackish waters of the estuary. You can almost see the ghosts of the families who lived here, huddled around a fire, laughing and telling stories of the old gods and the new Christ, unaware that their city would one day vanish completely from the map. But why did it vanish? As you stand in the center of Londonwick, you feel a shift in the atmosphere. The year is now 851. The golden age of the trading port is coming to a violent end. You hear the sound of bells ringing in the distance, a frantic, clanging alarm. To the east, smoke is rising. The Vikings have arrived. For the people living in these timber houses, there is no protection. There are no walls here. The very thing that made Londonwick successful, its open, easy access to the river, has now become its greatest weakness. You see people grabbing their most precious belongings, a few coins, a silver brooch, a favorite knife, and fleeing. Some head into the deep woods to the north, but many look toward the east, toward the gray, crumbling walls of the old Roman city. The ruins that their ancestors feared now look like their only hope for survival. You watch as the once vibrant streets of Londonwick are abandoned. The fires of the raiders take the thatch and the timber. The mud walls melt back into the earth. The ships stop coming to the sandy beach. Within a few generations, the forest and the fields begin to reclaim the land. The city of wood is buried under layers of silt and grass. By the time of the Norman conquest, the memory of Londonwick has faded so completely that people begin to call the area to the East London, and this area simply becomes the fields that lie outside the gates. You look around you now, and the Saxon houses are gone. You are back in the present day, standing on the hard pavement of Trafalgar Square. It is hard to believe that just a few feet beneath your soles, the remains of thousands of people, their homes, their shops, and their discarded lives, are still there. When the National Gallery was extended in the late 20th century, the workers found them. They found the skeletons of the Saxons who didn't make it out. They found the floor of a bakery with charred grain still resting on the hearth. You realize that Trafalgar Square is not just a high point of British imperial history or a place for political protest. It is a lid. It is a heavy stone cover on a sarcophagus that contains an entire lost civilization. The very name Aldwych, the street just a short walk from here, preserves this secret. It comes from the Old English words Ealdwic, which literally means the old settlement. Even when the buildings were gone and the fields were green, the people of London remembered that something had once been here. As you walk across the square, toward the steps of the gallery, you might feel a strange sensation. You are walking on the roof of a city. You are treading on the dreams of merchants who saw this river as a gateway to the world. The echoes of the Saxon loom and the Frisian trader are still there, vibrating in the earth, trapped beneath the weight of the lions and the fountains. The frontier of the Roman world became the heart of the Saxon world, and then it became a memory, waiting for the shovels of the modern age to bring it back into the light. You are not just standing in London. You are standing on top of Londonwick, the ghost that refuses to be forgotten. Close your eyes for a moment and let the sounds of the modern city fade. The hum of the red double-decker buses, the chatter of tourists from every corner of the globe, and the rhythmic splashing of the fountains begin to dissolve. In their place, a different kind of noise rises from the earth beneath your feet. It is a chorus of heavy, rhythmic thuds, the sound of iron shoes striking cobblestone, the sharp, piercing whistle of a groom, the fluttering of wings high above in the rafters. You are no longer standing in a public square named after a naval victory. You are standing in the heart of the King's Mews, the royal stables that occupied this very ground for more than 5 centuries. To understand what lies beneath the paving stones of Trafalgar Square, you have to understand that for hundreds of years, this was not an open space. It was a fortress of brick and stone dedicated to the power and prestige of the English monarchy's transport and sport. Long before the National Gallery dominated the northern edge of the square, a different kind of monumental architecture stood here. It was a place of sweat, leather, hay, and the constant, restless energy of hundreds of animals. You walk through a massive stone gateway, and the air immediately changes. It grows heavier, warmer, and thick with the scent of ammonia, dried grass, and expensive horseflesh. This is the 14th century, the reign of Richard II. The ground you are walking on has been transformed from the abandoned ruins of the Saxon settlement into a sprawling complex. But it is not horses that dominate the scene yet. Look up toward the high, timbered ceilings of the buildings surrounding the courtyard. You hear a strange, repetitive sound, a scratching of talons and a low, muffled cry. This is where the name comes from. The word mews comes from the French word mur, meaning to molt. In this era, this site was primarily the royal falconry. This was where the king's hawks were kept during their molting season. Imagine the sight of dozens of magnificent birds of prey, hooded and perched in the shadows, shedding their old feathers and waiting for the hunting season to begin. This was a place of high status. Falconry was the sport of kings, a display of mastery over nature. The men who worked here were specialists, living in small rooms built into the walls, their lives governed by the cycles of the birds. But time moves on and the needs of the crown shift. You watch as the years accelerate. The hawks begin to disappear, replaced by something much larger and louder. In the year 1534, a catastrophic fire breaks out in the royal stables at Bloomsbury. King Henry VIII, never a man to be left without his luxuries, decides that the falconry site here at Charing Cross will become the new home for his horses. The birds are evicted, and the mews are rebuilt on a grander scale to accommodate the massive creatures required to carry a Tudor king and his court. As you stand in the center of the widened courtyard, the transformation is complete. The king's mews has become a city within a city. Beneath where the fountains now spray water for photographs, there was once a labyrinth of stalls, tack rooms, and granaries. You see grooms rushing past with buckets of water, their boots clicking on the heavy paving stones. These stones are still there, buried layers deep, providing the very foundation upon which the square rests. By the time you reach the 1800s, the mews have evolved into a masterpiece of classical architecture. Imagine standing before the great stables, designed by William Kent in 1732. This was not just a barn. It was a palace for horses. To your eyes, it would look more like a museum or a grand government building than a stable. It featured 3 massive, arched gateways and a long, elegant facade of Portland stone that stretched across the northern side of what is now the square. It was a statement of Georgian order and wealth. Walk with me into the interior of Kent's stables. The scale is breathtaking. The ceilings are vaulted, designed to keep the air moving and the temperature cool for the animals. The stalls are wide, carved from fine timber, and the floors are angled slightly to allow for drainage, a marvel of 18th century engineering. This is where the famous Windsor Greys would have been housed, the powerful horses that pulled the royal carriages for state occasions. You can hear the low nickering of a stallion in the corner, the sound echoing off the stone walls. The floor is covered in a thick layer of clean, golden straw, which muffles your footsteps as you move through the shadows. But the mews were more than just a home for horses. They were a bustling community. You find yourself wandering into the side buildings, where the elite carriage makers and harness menders worked. You smell the sharp tang of tanned leather and the smoky aroma of the blacksmith's forge. Hundreds of people lived and worked here. There were apartments for the king's master of the horse, rooms for the postilions, and barracks for the soldiers who guarded the royal transport. When you walk across Trafalgar Square today, you are walking over the ghosts of these domestic lives. Somewhere beneath the statue of George IV, There were once kitchens where porridge was stirred at dawn and small bedrooms where weary grooms collapsed after a long day on the London roads. However, the 19th century brought the winds of change. London was exploding in size, and the tangled, cramped streets of Charing Cross were seen as an eyesore and a bottleneck. The Great Mews, for all its architectural beauty, was increasingly viewed as a relic of an older world. King George IV, during his regency and subsequent reign, became obsessed with the idea of beautifying the capital. He wanted a grand open space, a forum that would reflect the power of the British Empire. You watch as the demolition begins in the 1820s. It is a slow, dusty process. The magnificent Portland stone of William Kent's stables is pulled down block by block. The earth is leveled. The deep foundations of the Tudor and Georgian stables are filled in with rubble or built over with new, heavy supports. The horses are moved to the new Royal Mews at Buckingham Palace, where they remain to this day. Yet, as the grand square we recognize today began to take shape under the direction of architect John Nash, the past was not entirely erased. It was merely submerged. When engineers today dig beneath the square for maintenance or archaeological surveys, they still find the evidence of the equine city that once stood here. They find the remnants of the drainage systems designed to carry away the waste of 300 horses. They find the thick, scorched layers of earth from the Great Fire of 1534. They find horse teeth, bits of rusted bridles, and the worn soles of leather shoes that once trod these hidden corridors. Think of the weight of the history you are standing upon. Beneath the modern asphalt and the heavy granite plinths, the King's Mews remains as a subterranean footprint. It is the reason the square is the size and shape it is. The boundaries of the Mews dictated the boundaries of the public space. The very orientation of the National Gallery was chosen to mirror the long, grand line of the stables that preceded it. As you stand here, looking up at Nelson's column, remember that the glory of the Navy is a relatively new arrival. For half a millennium, this ground belonged to the horse and the hawk. The thrum of the city today hides the spectral echoes of 1,000 neighs and the rustle of 1,000 wings. The King's Mews was the equine heart of the British monarchy, and though the buildings are gone, their foundations remain, a silent, stony skeleton supporting the weight of the modern world. You are walking on the floorboards of a vanished palace, a place where the king's horses once dreamt in the dark, right beneath your feet. You step away from the shadows of the royal stables and feel the air change. The ground beneath your boots is no longer the packed earth of a 19th century courtyard, but the ancient, rutted mud of a 13th century crossroads. Imagine the year is 1290. You are standing in the small, quiet village of Charing, a place that feels worlds away from the bustling merchant hub of London to the east and the prayerful silence of Westminster to the west. Around you, the air is thick with the scent of the river and the wood smoke of small cottages. But today, the silence is broken by a low, rhythmic sound. It is the tolling of bells, echoing across the marshy fields. You turn your head and see a sight that stops the breath in your throat. A procession is winding its way toward you, a sea of black and gold moving slowly through the winter mist. Hundreds of people are walking in silence, their heads bowed. There are knights in heavy cloaks, priests swinging censers that fill the cold air with the smell of frankincense. And at the center of it all, a horse-drawn carriage bearing a coffin. Behind it rides a man whose face is a mask of such profound, hollowed-out grief that you cannot look away. This is King Edward I, and he is bringing his wife home. To understand what lies beneath the pavement of Trafalgar Square, you have to understand this man and the woman he lost. Eleanor of Castile was not just a queen consort. She was the sun around which Edward's world orbited. In an age of political marriages and cold alliances, theirs was a rare, burning romance. They were inseparable. She traveled with him on crusades. She advised him on matters of state, and she bore him 16 children. When she fell ill and died in the village of Harby in Nottinghamshire, it was as if the light had been extinguished from the kingdom. Edward's grief was not a quiet thing. It was monumental. He vowed that everywhere her body rested on the long journey back to Westminster Abbey, a memorial would be built. 12 stops, 12 nights, 12 crosses. You are standing at the site of the 12th and final stop. This is Charing, the last place her body rested before it reached its final tomb. As you stand here in the mud of the medieval road, you can almost see the craftsmen arriving. They are the finest masons and sculptors in the land, led by Master Richard of Crundale. They aren't just building a marker. They are building a testament. Over the next few years, you watch as a structure of Kenstone and Purbeck marble rises from the ground. It is an octagonal tower, reaching up toward the gray London sky, decorated with intricate carvings of foliage and shields. And there, standing in niches halfway up the monument, are the statues of Eleanor herself. She looks down at you with a serene, stony gaze, a queen frozen in time, holding a scepter and a ring. For 3.5 centuries, this cross was the landmark of this spot. It was the tallest and most ornate of all the Eleanor crosses. It was the needle that pointed the way to the heart of English power. When people spoke of Charing Cross, they weren't talking about a train station or a neighborhood. They were talking about this specific pile of consecrated stone. You walk around the base of the monument, feeling the texture of the history. This spot, where the statues of the Queen once stood, is the true center of London. Even today, when you see a road sign that tells you how many miles you are from London, those miles are measured from exactly where you are standing. This is point zero. This is the heart of the map. But history is rarely kind to monuments of love, especially when politics and religion begin to simmer. You move forward in time and the air grows tense. It is now 1647. The English Civil War is tearing the country apart. The King, Charles I, is at war with his own parliament. To the Puritans who now control the city, the beautiful, ornate cross of Eleanor is no longer a symbol of a king's devotion. It is an idol. It is a remnant of a royalist, Catholic past that they want to erase. You hear the sound of hammers again, but this time they are not the hammers of creators. They are the hammers of destroyers. You watch as the statues are pulled down. The delicate carvings are smashed into rubble. The Puritans are thorough. They don't just want the cross gone. They want it repurposed. Legend says that some of the stones from Eleanor's cross were taken down to Whitehall and used to pave the very path that King Charles I would later walk on his way to his execution. Other stones were allegedly sold to local builders as scrap. The monument that had stood for 350 years vanished, leaving behind nothing but an empty space in the middle of the road and a name that would haunt the square forever. The space did not stay empty for long. After the monarchy was restored, the site of the cross became a place of public spectacle of a much darker kind. Because this was the gateway between the city and the court, it was the perfect place for a warning. You stand on the site in 1660 and see the gallows being erected. This is where the regicides, the men who signed the death warrant of Charles I, were brought to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. The ground beneath your feet, once consecrated by the passing of a beloved queen, was soaked in the blood of the men who had killed a king. Eventually, the grim spectacles ended, and in 1675, a new figure arrived to claim the center of the crossroads. It is the statue you see today, the bronze figure of King Charles I on horseback, looking down Whitehall toward the place where he lost his head. It is a strange irony. The man whose father lost the crown and whose enemies destroyed the Eleanor Cross now stands on the very spot where that cross once lived. But what about the Charing Cross, you know? The one you see when you exit the train station? You walk a few hundred yards toward the front of the station, and there it is. A towering, ornate Gothic monument. It looks ancient. It looks like it belongs to the time of knights and queens. But look closer. This is a Victorian reimagining. It was built in 1865, more than 600 years after Eleanor's death. The Victorians loved the romance of the Middle Ages, and they felt that the station needed a landmark that evoked the lost history of the site. It is a beautiful tribute, and it captures the spirit of the original, but it is a ghost. The true Charing Cross, the one built with the raw grief of a king, lies elsewhere. It lies in the fragments of stone scattered through the foundations of the buildings around you. It lies in the name of the streets and the collective memory of the city. Most importantly, it lies in the very geometry of London. Every time a taxi driver looks at a map, every time a hiker calculates their distance from the city, they are paying homage to Eleanor of Castile. You stand back at the base of the Charles I statue and look down. Beneath the layers of asphalt and the vibrating rumble of the underground trains, the ghost of the original cross remains. It is the anchor of the square. It represents the transition from the medieval world of royal villages to the modern world of imperial plazas. It is a reminder that Trafalgar Square was not born from a vacuum or a single architect's plan. It was carved out of a living, breathing landscape where kings wept and queens were carried in state. You feel the weight of those centuries pressing up through the soles of your shoes. The Charing Cross was more than a monument. It was a bridge between the living and the dead, between the city of commerce and the city of God. As you look around at the tourists taking photos and the buses circling the square, you realize that you are standing at the intersection of 1,000 years of English history. The cross may be gone, but its shadow is long, reaching out from the 13th century to touch everything you see. You take one last look at the bronze king on his horse, and then you turn your gaze back to the ground. You are ready to move on, to see what else is hidden in the layers of this earth. Because the square has more stories to tell, and not all of them are about kings and queens. Some of them are much older, much stranger, and far more primal. You are about to descend even deeper into the timeline, to a version of this place that no human eyes were ever meant to see. The street noise begins to fade, and the air grows cold again. But this time, it is not the cold of a London winter. It is the cold of a world before London ever existed. You are standing in a place where the sun never quite reaches the ground. Forget the wide, sweeping granite vistas of the modern square. Forget the grand fountains and the 4 bronze lions that guard the base of the column. To understand what lies beneath your feet, you must first imagine the world that was systematically erased to make room for them. You are now stepping back into the early 19th century, specifically into a labyrinth of narrow, damp alleys that once choked this very ground. This was the area known to locals as the Charing Cross Rookery. You feel the air grow heavy and thick with the scent of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, acidic tang of gin. The ground beneath your boots is no longer flat stone. It is a treacherous mix of mud, horse manure, and household refuse, slick and uneven. You turn your shoulders sideways because the walls of the houses on either side of you are so close they seem to be leaning in for a whisper. These are the tenements of the poor, buildings that have been partitioned and subdivided so many times that a single room might house 3 different families. The shadow we are talking about is not just a physical one. It is the reputation of the great Bermondsey slums from across the river, a dark standard of living that had crept its way into the heart of London. You see, before Trafalgar Square was a monument to a naval hero, it was a scar on the face of the city. The wealthy residents of the West End looked toward this patch of land with a mixture of fear and disgust. To them, the people living here were not citizens, but a swarm. They called these places rookeries because, like the nests of the crows, the dwellings were crowded, noisy, and built on top of one another in a chaotic, precarious tangle. You walk deeper into the maze, past a place the locals call Porridge Island. Do not let the name fool you into thinking of something wholesome. This was a narrow strip of cookshops and dilapidated stalls where the steam from boiling tripe and cheap stews clung to the brickwork like a gray shroud. You see children darting through the shadows, their feet bare against the cold slime of the cobblestones. They are the watercress sellers and the mudlarks who have crawled up from the river banks, seeking shelter in the cellars that still exist, buried somewhere beneath the National Gallery. These cellars are where the story gets truly dark. You imagine descending a set of rotting wooden stairs into a space that was never meant for human habitation. This is the world beneath the square. In the 1820s, thousands of people lived below the street level in vaulted chambers that were originally intended for coal storage or as the foundations of the old royal mews. You feel the dampness seeping through your clothes. There is no ventilation here. The only light comes from a single, flickering tallow candle stuck to a damp stone wall. In this cramped darkness, you might find a dozen people sleeping on piles of rags. This was the shadow of Bermondsey, a reflection of the industrial misery of the South Bank, thriving right here in the shadow of the King's Palace. You might wonder why this world is gone. The answer lies in the grand ambitions of men like John Nash and the Prince Regent. They looked at the map of London and saw a hole where a heart should be. They wanted a grand opening, a psychological bridge between the royal parks and the financial city. But to build a square of such magnitude, they had to perform a massive act of historical surgery. They had to cut away the rookeries. You can almost hear the sound of the first pickaxes striking the brickwork. It began in the late 1820s and continued for years. Imagine the noise of thousands of houses being torn down simultaneously. You watch as the narrow alleys are opened up to the sky for the first time in centuries. The people who lived in these cellars and tenements were not given new homes. They were simply pushed out, forced to carry their few belongings into the already overcrowded districts of Seven Dials or across the bridge to the very Bermondsey whose shadow they had lived under. As you walk across the modern square today, you are walking on the roof of a graveyard of homes. When the engineers began to level the ground for the square, they did not always dig everything out. In many cases, it was easier to simply smash the upper floors of the tenements into their own cellars and pack the rubble down. You are walking over layers of crushed brick, broken pottery, and the forgotten clay pipes of men who died long before Nelson ever set sail for Trafalgar. There is a specific kind of silence that exists beneath the paving stones. If you could peel back the asphalt and the granite, you would find the foundations of the Golden Cross Inn, once one of the busiest coaching inns in London. You would find the remnants of the stables where hundreds of horses once stomped and whinnied. This was a place of frantic motion, the gateway to the south of England. Now, it is just a pressurized layer of earth and debris, but the shadow persists in the layout of the square itself. Have you ever noticed how the streets around Trafalgar Square seem to funnel you in certain directions? That is no accident. The planners designed the square to be a place of control. They wanted wide, open spaces where a crowd could be seen and, if necessary, dispersed by the military. The rookeries were dangerous because they were illegible to the law. You could disappear into those alleys and never be found. By creating the square, the authorities were trying to cast light into the Bermondsey shadow, to ensure that no such darkness could ever take root in the center of the city again. Yet, as you stand near the base of the column, looking toward the Church of St. Martin in the Fields, you might feel a slight chill. Underneath that church, the vaults go deep. During the 19th century, when the slums were being cleared, the crypts of the church became a final refuge for the destitute. It is said that even after the houses were gone, the ghosts of the rookery remained in the underground chambers of the church, a silent population that refused to be evicted by the grand march of progress. You must realize that the grandeur of the square is a mask. It is a beautiful heavy lid placed over a messy, vibrant, and painful past. The slums below were not just buildings. They were a way of life that the city tried to bury and forget. But the earth remembers. Every time a new pipe is laid or a tunnel is dug near the square, fragments of this lost world come to the surface. A rusted key, a leather shoe sole, a glass marble. These are the whispers from the shadow. You are no longer a visitor to a monument. You are a witness to a disappearance. The next time you see the tourists snapping photos of the lions, think of the cellars directly beneath their feet. Think of the families who cooked their meager meals in the dark, and the children who played in alleys so narrow they could touch both walls at once. The square is not just a place of victory for the British Navy. It is a monument to the clearing of the poor. The shadow of Bermondsey was not just a place across the river. It was the soul of this land before it was paved over and given a name of glory. As you prepare to move deeper into the hidden structures of the square, keep that image of the crushed brick and the buried cellars in your mind. The city is a living thing, and it grows by consuming its own past. You are standing on the evidence of that hunger. The slums are gone, but their footprint remains, etched into the very geology of the city, waiting for someone to remember they were there. You turn away from the light of the open square, feeling the weight of the pavement, and you realize that the most important parts of London are often the ones you cannot see. The shadow is still there, just beneath the surface, holding up the weight of the world above. Imagine you are standing at the heart of London in the early months of 1826. You are at the junction where the Strand meets Pall Mall, but the world around you is unrecognizable. There is no wide, sweeping expanse of stone. There are no soaring fountains or bronze lions. Instead, you are hemmed in. The air is thick, not just with the usual coal smoke of a 19th century morning, but with a fine, gritty powder that coats your tongue and clings to your eyelashes. This is the dust of a dying neighborhood. Around you, the very fabric of old London is being torn apart. You are witnessing the Great Demolition, a moment of calculated destruction that will change the face of this city forever. For centuries, this area was a chaotic tangle of stables, slums, and narrow alleys. But today, the order has been given to sweep it all away. You look up and see men balanced precariously on the remains of rooftop garden walls and chimney stacks. They are armed with nothing more than heavy sledgehammers and iron crowbars. With every rhythmic strike, a piece of the past falls away. The sound is deafening. It is the sound of timber splintering and ancient mortar turning to clouds of gray silt. To your left stands the King's Mews. This massive complex, which once housed the Royal Hawks and later the Royal Horses, is the dominant feature of the landscape. It is a grand building, designed by William Kent, with great stone arches and a sense of fading majesty. But even the king's own stables are not safe. The demolition teams are moving in. You can see the heavy wooden doors being unhinged and dragged through the mud. The royal horses have been moved to the new stables at Buckingham Palace, leaving behind an empty shell that feels like a ghost of the 18th century. As you walk further into the chaos, you enter a labyrinth of streets known to the locals as the Bermudas. These are not the tropical islands of the Atlantic, but a series of dark, winding passages where a person could easily disappear from the law or from their creditors. You feel the claustrophobia of these alleys as they are being opened up to the sky for the first time in generations. You pass through Porridge Island, a notorious narrow alleyway famous for its cheap cookshops and the constant, lingering smell of boiled meat and greasy steam. The buildings here are so close together that neighbors could reach out of their windows and shake hands across the street. But now those windows are smashed. The thatched and tiled roofs are being stripped. You see the internal skeletons of these houses, the lath and plaster exposed like raw ribs. You might wonder why this is happening. Who decided that this entire world deserved to be erased? You turn your gaze toward the figure of John Nash. While you might not see the man himself in the mud and the grit, his presence is everywhere. Nash is the architect of the Prince Regent, the man with a vision to transform London from a cluttered medieval heap into a city that rivals the grandeur of Paris or Rome. To Nash and to the government of 1826, these streets are not homes. They are obstacles. They are a blight on the path between the royal residence at St. James's and the new developments to the north. The Charing Cross Improvement Act has been passed by Parliament, giving the Crown the legal power to seize and destroy. You see the notices posted on the remaining walls, damp and peeling. They announce the end of this neighborhood. For the shopkeepers of the Strand and the families living in the cramped tenements of the Bermudas, this is a catastrophe. You see them moving their belongings onto handcarts. Old chairs, bundles of clothes, and crates of kitchenware are piled high as they navigate the rubble. There is a sense of hurried desperation. The demolition crews do not wait for everyone to be gone. They move with the cold efficiency of progress. As you stand in the middle of what will one day be the square, the ground beneath your feet feels unstable. The laborers are digging deep into the earth, pulling up the foundations of buildings that have stood since the time of the Tudors. You watch as they uncover old wells, long since forgotten, and the stone footings of even older medieval walls. The history of London is being excavated and discarded in the same breath. Every shovel of earth reveals a fragment of the past, a broken pipe, a discarded leather shoe, or a rusted coin, all thrown into the back of heavy wooden carts to be hauled away and used as infill for new roads elsewhere. The scale of the destruction is difficult to grasp. You look toward the Church of St. Martin in the Fields. For centuries, it was buried behind a screen of houses, its beautiful portico barely visible to anyone who did not live in its immediate shadow. Now, as the houses in front of it are leveled, the church seems to emerge from the earth. It is as if the building is taking its first full breath of fresh air in 100 years. You see the white Portland stone glowing in the pale London sun, freed from the grime and the crowding of the slums. This is what Nash wanted. He wanted to create vistas. He wanted the eye to be able to travel across long distances, seeing the monuments of the state and the church without the interruption of the poor and their messy lives. But the price of that vista is a thick, choking atmosphere. The dust is everywhere. It settles on the fine coats of the gentlemen who have come to watch the spectacle from a safe distance. It turns the puddles in the road into a thick, brick-colored paste. You hear the calls of the foremen, the whistles of the carters, and the constant, dull thud of heavy objects hitting the ground. There is no machinery here, no steam shovels or bulldozers. This is a demolition powered by human muscle and the gravity of falling stone. You see teams of men pulling on thick hemp ropes attached to the tops of walls, leaning back with all their weight until the brickwork groans, wavers, and then collapses in a spectacular roar of noise and debris. As the sun begins to set through the haze, the area looks like a battlefield. The skyline is jagged and broken. You realize that you are standing in a vacuum. The old world is gone, but the new world has not yet arrived. The space that will become Trafalgar Square is, at this moment, a massive, gaping wound in the center of the city. It is a wasteland of broken timber, shattered glass, and mounds of earth. The streets you walked through just months ago, like Hedge Lane and Hartshorn Lane, no longer exist. Their names are being wiped from the maps, replaced by the grander titles of the new era. You feel a sense of loss in the air, even amidst the excitement of the new. There is a specific smell to an old building being torn down, a scent of ancient dust, damp wood, and the lingering aroma of the thousands of meals cooked over hundreds of years in its hearths. All of that is being carried away in the carts. You watch the last of the carts leave for the evening, their wheels creaking under the weight of London's discarded history. The Great Demolition of 1826 is not just about clearing space. It is an act of erasure. The authorities want to bury the memory of the rookeries and the chaos of the Mews. They want a clean slate upon which to build a monument to empire and victory. As you stand there in the settling dust, you can feel the emptiness of the ground. The hundreds of homes that once stood here are gone, leaving behind only the cold, hard earth and the deep, hidden foundations that the workmen have not yet reached. Tomorrow the hammers will start again. The remaining walls of the King's Mews will fall. The last of the tenements on the edge of the site will be leveled. By the time this work is finished, the landscape will be so flat and so open that it will be impossible to remember exactly where the old streets once ran. You take one last look at the silhouette of St. Martin's, now standing lonely against the darkening sky, before you turn to leave the ruins. The square is coming, but for now, it is only a dream held in the minds of architects, built upon the literal remains of a world that was given no choice but to vanish. The weight of what was lost is still here, pressing down into the dirt, waiting for the heavy stones of the new square to be laid on top of it. You stand in the center of what will one day be the most famous crossroads in the world. But for now, it is a landscape of churned mud and splintered timber. The year is 1844, and the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and the metallic tang of wet iron. You are looking at a square in transition, a massive scar on the face of the city that is slowly being stitched back together with granite and stone. But it is not just what is being built upward that catches your eye. It is what is being carved out beneath your feet. Around you, the noise is deafening. There is the rhythmic clack of hammers against stone, the shouting of foremen, and the heavy, wet thud of shovels hitting clay. You walk toward the center of the site, careful to avoid the deep ruts left by the wheels of horse-drawn carts. Here the ground opens up. This is where the fountains will sit. You might think of a fountain as a simple decoration, a pretty plume of water meant to entertain the eye. But as you look down into the excavations, you realize that these fountains are a massive feat of Victorian engineering. They are the visible tips of a hidden world, a complex network of veins and arteries designed to pull water from the very bones of the earth. The project is the brainchild of Charles Barry, the man who is also busy rebuilding the Houses of Parliament. He knows that this vast, open space needs something to break up its severity. Without the fountains, the square would be a flat, daunting expanse of stone. But there is a more practical reason for their existence, one that explains the deep digging you see before you. The government is nervous about the crowds. By placing large basins of water in the center of the square, they can limit the space where a mob might gather. It is a form of crowd control disguised as art. And even more practically, the National Gallery, sitting just to the north, needs a massive supply of water in case of fire. You watch as a group of men, known as well sinkers, prepare to descend into a dark shaft. They do not look like the stonemasons or the carpenters. They are covered in a slick, grayish grime, the mark of those who spend their lives in the wet dark. You lean over the edge of the pit, and the temperature drops. A damp, cool draft rises from the earth, smelling of minerals and ancient things. To get the water for these fountains, the engineers have decided not to rely on the polluted rivers or the shallow, tainted wells of the surface. Instead, they are going deep. They are digging through the thick, waterproof layer of London clay, a heavy blue-gray sludge that has kept the secrets of the city for millennia. Beneath that clay lies the chalk, a porous white stone that holds a massive reservoir of filtered, pressurized water. This is an artesian well. You follow the line of a thick iron pipe that disappears into a brick-lined shaft. This shaft goes down hundreds of feet. Imagine the effort of that descent. These men are not using modern drills. They are using heavy iron tools, chisels, and buckets, working in the dim light of lanterns that flicker and sputter in the low-oxygen air. They are carving a path through the earth, inch by agonizing inch. As you watch, a whistle blows, and a steam engine nearby begins to hiss. This is the heart of the operation. Behind the National Gallery, in a place called Orange Street, they are building a pumping station. It is a cathedral of industry, filled with the rhythmic breathing of massive Bolton and Watt steam engines. These machines are the giants of the age, their iron beams rocking back and forth like the heads of great beasts. They provide the power to suck the water up from the chalk beds, pushing it through a subterranean labyrinth to the square where you stand. You walk over to one of the newly laid basins. It is made of solid Peterhead granite, polished until it shines like dark glass. It feels cold and permanent under your hand. You can see the apertures where the water will soon burst forth. The engineers are promising a display of power unlike anything London has seen. They want the water to shoot high into the air, a symbol of the mastery of the city over nature. But the digging is not without its casualties. You hear the workers talking about the black damp, the pockets of bad air that can settle at the bottom of a deep well and kill a man before he even realizes he is in danger. You see the tension in their shoulders as they lower a comrade into the hole. Every foot they descend is a gamble against the weight of the city pressing down on them. As the sun begins to set, casting long orange shadows across the construction site, you realize the sheer scale of what is happening under the surface. It is not just one well. There are multiple boreholes, some reaching nearly 400 feet into the ground. These are linked by tunnels large enough for a man to crawl through, a hidden map that mirrors the streets above. When the water finally arrives, it will be a moment of triumph. You can almost hear it now, the distant gurgle in the pipes, the sound of the earth yielding its treasure. When the valves are opened for the first time, the pressure from the steam engines will force the water through the nozzles in a spectacular roar. It will not just be a trickle. It will be a statement. You look back toward the National Gallery. From this vantage point, the square looks like a battlefield, but you know that in a few years it will be a place of leisure. People will sit on the edges of these granite basins, the mist from the fountains cooling their faces on a hot July afternoon. They will listen to the splash and the churn, never thinking about the dark, wet shafts or the men who toiled in the chalk to make it possible. The fountains are also a response to the thirst of the city. In the 1840s, London is a place of water riots and cholera. The idea of pure, clean water bubbling up in the heart of the city is almost miraculous. Even if the public is not allowed to drink from these ornamental basins, the sight of clear water is a psychological relief from the filth of the Thames. You see a foreman checking a set of blueprints. He is tracing the line from the Orange Street pumps to the central jets. The precision required is staggering. If the pressure is too low, the fountains will be a disappointment, a pathetic dribble in the middle of a grand square. If it is too high, the water will drench the pedestrians and the fine carriages passing by. It is a delicate balance of steam, iron, and gravity. As you prepare to leave the site, you take one last look down into the open trench. The pipes are being buried now, covered over with layers of gravel and earth. The brickwork of the wells is being sealed. Soon, the heavy paving stones of the square will be laid on top, hiding all this work from view. The machinery, the shafts, and the deep paths into the chalk will become legends, stories told by the men who built them and then forgotten by the millions who will walk over them. You realize that the square is not just a surface. It is a lid. It is a grand stone cover for a mechanical underworld. The fountains are the breath of that world, the way the underground speaks to the sky. As you walk away, the sound of the steam engine follows you, a steady, mechanical heartbeat pulsing beneath the mud, waiting for the day the water finally rises to meet the light. The project is an obsession for some. You see the engineers debating the height of the plumes. They want 20 feet, 30 feet, a towering wall of white water. They are fighting against the wind and the soot, trying to create something pure in a city that is anything but. The granite of the basins is being carved with intricate patterns, dolphins and shells that will be perpetually bathed in the spray. You find yourself thinking about the sheer volume of water. Thousands of gallons an hour, pulled from the deep silence of the prehistoric earth and thrown into the noise of the 19th century. It is a collision of eras. The water has been sitting in that chalk for millions of years, and now, thanks to the burning of coal and the movement of pistons, it is being forced into the air to please the eyes of Victorian Londoners. The work continues late into the night. You see the glow of braziers reflected in the puddles. The men do not stop. The square must be finished. The fountains must play. As you step out of the construction zone and back onto the familiar cobbles of the established streets, you feel the vibration of the earth. Or perhaps it is just your imagination, the lingering sensation of those massive steam engines pounding away in the dark. You leave behind the mud and the noise, but the image of those deep, dark wells stays with you. You know that whenever you see the fountains in the future, you will not just see the water. You will see the shafts. You will see the iron pipes. You will see the men covered in gray clay, digging their way toward a treasure that London desperately needs. The fountains are more than a decoration. They are a victory over the depths, a sign that even the hidden layers of the world can be harnessed and brought to the surface to serve the city. The weight of the stones above may be immense, but the pressure of the water below is relentless. It is a silent war of forces, held in check by the skill of the engineers and the strength of the granite. And as the last of the pipes are laid, the square prepares for its transformation from a muddy pit into the grand centerpiece of an empire. The stage is set, the pipes are primed, and the earth is ready to give up its water. You are standing on the edge of the square, where the gray stones meet the asphalt of the busy road. To the millions who pass by every year, this is just a crossroads of tourism and traffic. But you are looking for something else. You are looking through the pavement, past the layers of history, down into the dark, damp veins of the city. Beneath your boots, several meters down, there is a world that most Londoners choose to forget. It is a world of dripping water, echoing footsteps, and the relentless, rhythmic flow of human waste. Welcome to the Victorian sewers. To understand why this labyrinth exists beneath your feet, you have to imagine London in the middle of the 19th century. It is not the clean, regulated city you see today. It is a place of choking smog and unimaginable filth. By the 1850s, the city had outgrown its ancient cesspits. Every cellar in every tenement was overflowing with human refuse. The small rivers that once ran clear through the city, like the Fleet and the Tyburn, had been turned into open ditches of sludge. Close your eyes and try to breathe in that air. It is thick and heavy, smelling of rot and disease. In the summer of 1858, this smell became so powerful that it was given a name: the Great Stink. The heat was so intense that the River Thames began to ferment. The curtains of the Houses of Parliament were soaked in chloride of lime to stop the politicians from fainting. They realized then that if they did not fix the waste, the city would die. Now imagine a man standing at a drawing board. His name is Joseph Bazalgette. He is a man of iron will and precise mathematics. He is the architect of the world you are about to enter. He did not just build a few pipes. He redesigned the entire subterranean geography of London. You descend a narrow iron ladder, your hands gripping the cold, slick rungs. As you move deeper, the roar of the London traffic fades, replaced by a low, hollow thrum. The temperature drops. The air turns cool and carries a sharp, metallic tang mixed with the scent of wet stone. You reach the bottom and your boots splash into shallow, moving water. Turn on your lantern. The beam cuts through the gloom, reflecting off walls made of millions upon millions of red bricks. Look closely at the craftsmanship. These are not just functional tunnels. They are cathedral-like in their precision. Every brick was laid by hand. Bazalgette insisted on using Portland cement, a new and expensive material at the time, because he knew it would harden underwater. He was building for the next 1,000 years. You notice the shape of the tunnel. It is not a simple circle. It is shaped like an egg, narrow at the bottom and wider at the top. You ask yourself why. The answer is brilliant in its simplicity. When the water level is low, the narrow base keeps the flow moving fast enough to wash away the heavy sediment. When the rains come and the tunnels fill, the wide upper section provides the capacity needed to prevent the streets above from flooding. This is the engineering heartbeat of the city. As you walk deeper into the labyrinth, the tunnels begin to branch off. Some are small, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Others are so vast that a steam train could pass through them with room to spare. You are walking along a service walkway, a narrow ledge of stone above the main flow. To your left, the dark water surges forward, a silent river carrying the city's secrets toward the east. Imagine the men who worked here in the Victorian era. They were called flushers. They spent their days and nights in this darkness, wearing heavy leather boots and carrying oil lamps. Their job was to clear blockages, often using nothing but wooden boards to push the sludge along. They worked in constant danger. A sudden rainstorm miles away could send a wall of water rushing through these tunnels with no warning. They lived with the constant threat of deadly gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide. You stop for a moment and listen. Above you, you can hear a distant, muffled vibration. That is the sound of a red double-decker bus crossing the square. Feels like a world away. Down here, time feels different. The bricks around you have been here since the 1860s. They have survived world wars, the vibration of the underground, and the weight of a changing city. This particular stretch of the sewer network beneath Trafalgar Square is a vital junction. It connects the smaller local drains to the massive intercepting sewers that run parallel to the Thames. Without this hidden network, the fountains you saw earlier would be surrounded by stagnant pools of filth. The very ground you walk on would be unstable. Think about the sheer scale of what lies beneath you. Bazalgette and his army of laborers laid over 80 miles of main intercepting sewers and more than 1,100 miles of street sewers. They used over 300 million bricks. They moved more earth than you can possibly conceive. And they did it all without modern computers or satellite positioning. They did it with levels, transits, and sheer physical grit. You shine your light upward and see the roots of a tree poking through a tiny fissure in the brickwork, reaching down for moisture. It is a reminder that the world above and the world below are inextricably linked. The city is a living organism, and these sewers are its digestive system. As you continue your journey through the dark, you realize that this is the true foundation of modern London. Before these tunnels were built, cholera was a constant shadow over the city. Thousands died in every outbreak. People believed the disease was carried by bad air or miasma. But these sewers proved that by carrying the waste away and cleaning the water, the disease could be conquered. This labyrinth did more to save lives than almost any medical breakthrough of its time. You are walking through a monument to Victorian ambition. They did not just want to solve a problem. They wanted to build something that would last forever. Bazalgette intentionally made the pipes much larger than they needed to be at the time. He said that since they were only doing this once, they should account for the future growth of the population. Because of his foresight, these sewers are still in use today, serving a city several times larger than the one he knew. The air begins to feel fresher as you approach a ventilation shaft. You can see a faint, vertical sliver of gray daylight far above. It reminds you that it is time to return to the surface. You climb the ladder, your muscles aching from the trek through the damp silence. When you finally emerge and step back onto the pavement of Trafalgar Square, the world feels incredibly loud and bright. You see the tourists taking photos of the lions. You see the pigeons fluttering around the fountains. You see the grand buildings made of white stone. But you know something they do not. You know that all of this beauty is held up by a dark, brick-lined miracle. You know that the real story of London is not just what rises into the sky, but what flows beneath the ground. You look down at the soles of your boots, still slightly damp from the journey. You have seen the hidden architecture of the city. You have breathed the air of the 19th century. And as you walk away, you carry with you the knowledge of the labyrinth, the silent, red brick tunnels that keep the heart of London beating. They are a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, there is a hidden world of work and ingenuity that makes modern life possible. The city hums on, oblivious to the masterpiece below. You walk toward the National Gallery, but your mind is still down there, in the dark, listening to the water rush through the Victorian darkness. You have uncovered one of the square's greatest secrets, but the underground world is far larger than just one set of tunnels. As you cross the road, you realize that the sewers are only the beginning of the story. There are other tunnels, other chambers, and other histories waiting to be explored. The square is not just a destination. It is a lid on a container filled with the ghosts of progress. Every time you hear the rumble of a train or the splash of a fountain, you will remember what lies beneath the surface. You will remember the brick, the water, and the vision of the men who built a city that could finally breathe. For now, the sun is out and the square is full of life, but the labyrinth remains, waiting in the cool, quiet dark. You feel the ground vibrate before you hear the first thud. It is late September 1940, and the world you knew has been tilted on its axis. The clear, open sky of London is no longer a symbol of freedom, but a source of terror. You are standing in the center of Trafalgar Square, but the fountains are silent. There is no water dancing in the sunlight today. Instead, the basins are filled with stagnant, dark pools intended for the fire brigades, and the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and something sharper, something metallic. That is the smell of the city preparing to burn. You look up at Nelson, standing high on his column, and you see that he is surrounded by a different kind of horizon. The buildings around the square are masked by heavy, dark curtains. The windows of the National Gallery are boarded up or crisscrossed with thick tape to prevent shattering glass from flaying the skin of those inside. But your gaze quickly drops from the sky. The siren has begun its rising and falling wail, a sound that crawls up your spine and settles in your teeth. You know that the surface is no longer safe. You need to go down. You turn toward the north side of the square, near the steps of the gallery. You are not looking for a subway entrance or a grand lobby. You are looking for a heavy, reinforced door, something that looks entirely out of place against the neoclassical grandeur of the architecture. As you move, you join a stream of people. They are not running, not yet, but their pace is frantic and controlled. You see a woman clutching a small suitcase, a man with a gas mask canister bouncing against his hip, and children who look far too old for their years. You follow them down. The transition is immediate. You leave behind the fading light of a bruised afternoon and enter a world of gray. The air changes. It becomes cooler but also heavier. It smells of damp concrete, unwashed wool, and the faint, sweet scent of tobacco. You are entering the concrete shelters of Trafalgar Square. This is not the accidental refuge of a basement or a cellar. This is a deliberate, engineered fortress of the deep. As you descend the stairs, the sound of the city above begins to muffle. The frantic ringing of bicycle bells and the roar of the occasional military truck fade into a low, rhythmic thrum. You are entering the labyrinth that was reinforced specifically for this moment. You find yourself in a long, narrow corridor. The walls are not finished with the fine stone of the square above. Here you see the raw, brutalist reality of survival. The walls are thick, poured concrete, still showing the grain of the wooden planks used to mold them. Steel beams cross the ceiling, bolted together with rivets the size of your fist. Every few yards, a dim, yellow bulb hangs from a wire, casting long, swaying shadows that dance against the gray stone. You walk further in, and the corridor opens up into a larger chamber. This is where the people gather. You see rows of bunks, 3 tiers high, made of simple wooden slats or stretched canvas. They are crowded. People sit shoulder to shoulder, their knees drawn up. There is a strange, quiet murmuring, a low hum of voices that sounds like a hive of bees. People are reading by candlelight, knitting, or simply staring at the wall. You realize that for many of these people, the world above has ceased to exist for the night. They are the inhabitants of the subterranean city. Beneath the paving stones where you once watched pigeons and tourists, thousands of lives are being lived in the dark. You feel a sudden, sharp jolt. It is not a sound, but a physical punch to the soles of your feet. Above you, somewhere in the distance, a high explosive bomb has found the earth. You look up at the ceiling. You see a fine dusting of gray powder shake loose from the concrete and drift down like ghost snow. The people around you don't scream. They don't even jump. They simply pause, wait for the second vibration, and then resume their low conversations. They have learned to trust the weight of the square above them. They have learned to trust the feet of earth and the layers of reinforced stone that stand between them and the fire. You move deeper into the shelter, away from the civilian bunks, and you notice that the atmosphere changes. The corridors here are tighter, and the doors are made of heavy steel with circular handles that look like they belong on a submarine. This is the government side of the subterranean square. You are nearing the nerve center of the war effort. You hear the clatter of typewriters, a frantic, staccato sound that cuts through the silence. You see men in uniforms hurrying past, carrying folders tucked under their arms. This is where the square's secrets are kept. Beneath the fountains, there are telephone exchanges, signal rooms, and bunkers where the city's defense is coordinated. You are standing in a place where the geography of the war is mapped out in red and blue ink. You imagine the cables running through these walls, pulses of electricity carrying orders from the Admiralty or the War Office, moving through the very ground you stand on. The square above is a symbol of naval victory, but the square below is the machine that keeps that victory alive. It is a hive of activity that never sleeps, regardless of the time or the intensity of the raid above. You find a quiet corner and lean against the cold concrete. You can feel the chill of the earth seeping through your coat. You think about the sheer scale of what lies beneath your feet. It is not just one room or one tunnel. It is a sprawling network that connects the square to the underground stations, to the hidden bunkers of Whitehall, and to the deep shelters of the West End. It is a city within a city, a shadow London that only exists because the London of the sun is under siege. You listen to the sounds of the shelter. There is the drip of water from a leaky pipe, hitting a metal bucket with a steady, hypnotic beat. There is the sound of a distant fan, struggling to pull fresh air down from the surface through long vertical shafts. And there is the breathing. You are surrounded by the breath of hundreds of people, all of them trapped in this artificial cave, waiting for the all-clear. You begin to walk back toward the entrance, but you stop. You look at the walls again, really look at them. You see names scratched into the concrete. You see dates and short messages, tiny bits of graffiti left by people who weren't sure if they would see the morning. These are the marks of the human spirit refusing to be buried. Even in this brutal, gray, subterranean world, there is a desperate need to say, I was here. I survived the night. You realize that this concrete world is more than just a shield. It is a psychological landscape. To go underground is to admit that the world is broken, but to stay underground and keep working, keep talking, and keep breathing is an act of defiance. The square is a fortress, not just of stone and steel, but of collective will. As you climb the stairs back toward the surface, the air begins to thin. The heavy, recycled smell of the deep shelter gives way to something sharper. The raid has passed, or at least moved on to another part of the city. You reach the heavy steel door and push it open. You emerge back into Trafalgar Square, but it is not the square you left. The sun has gone down, and the world is draped in the velvety black of the total blackout. There are no streetlights, no glowing shop windows. The only light comes from the moon, casting a pale, silver glow over the silent lions. You can smell the smoke now, a thick, acrid scent of burning timber and burst gas mains. In the distance, the sky is glowing a dull, angry orange. You stand there for a moment, feeling the cold night air on your face. You look down at the paving stones beneath your boots. You know now that the ground is not solid. It is a hollow shell, a honeycomb of survival. You know that beneath the peaceful, moonlit stones, the typewriters are still clattering. The people are still huddled in their bunks, and the concrete lungs of the city are still breathing. The square at war is two different worlds. One is a place of ruins, shadows, and the constant threat of the sky. The other is a world of gray walls, yellow lights, and the heavy, reassuring weight of the earth. You have walked through the boundary between the two, and you will never look at the open space of the square the same way again. Every step you take across the plaza is a step over a hidden history, a step over a fortress that once held the heart of a city together while the world above fell apart. You walk away, leaving the silence of the square behind, but you carry the chill of the concrete in your bones. The war will eventually end, and the sirens will fall silent for good, but the shelters will remain. They will be sealed, forgotten, or repurposed, but they will always be there, resting in the dark, a permanent reminder of the time when London went to ground to save its soul. You leave the square, but the labyrinth stays, a silent witness beneath the stone. You are standing in the very center of Trafalgar Square. Around you, the city of London is a roar of modern life. The red double-decker buses groan as they pivot around the corner, their brakes hissing like mechanical beasts. Thousands of footsteps click and shuffle across the gray paving stones, and the four massive bronze lions guarding the base of Nelson's column look out over a sea of tourists and commuters. It is a place defined by its height and its grandeur, by the tall columns and the sprawling galleries that hem you in on all sides. But I want you to look down. Forget the statues and the pigeons for a moment. Focus on the ground beneath your feet. If you had a way to peel back the layers of this city like the skin of an onion, what would you see? You might expect to find the remnants of old gas pipes or the brickwork of Victorian sewers. You might expect the ruins of medieval cellars or perhaps a stray Roman coin pressed into the dark earth. But if you keep going, past the archaeology of humans and into the deep, silent history of the earth itself, you find something far more startling. Beneath the concrete and the asphalt, beneath the very foundations of the National Gallery, there lies a world that feels like it belongs on another continent entirely. Imagine that the ground begins to soften. The stone beneath your boots turns to damp, dark soil, and then to a coarse, sandy gravel. You are descending through time layer by layer. The noise of the traffic begins to fade, replaced by a strange, heavy silence. You are moving back past the kings and the queens, past the fires and the plagues, back more than 100,000 years. You are entering a period of history that geologists call the Ipswickian Interglacial. This was a brief, warm window in the middle of the Great Ice Age, a time when the glaciers had retreated to the north and the sun beat down on a landscape that would be unrecognizable to any Londoner today. In the mid-1950s, workmen were busy renovating Canada House, the grand building that sits on the western edge of the square. They were digging deep into the ground to reinforce the foundations, and as their shovels bit into the earth, they struck something hard. It was not a stone, and it was not a piece of man-made metal. It was bone. But it was not just any bone. As the dirt was brushed away, the massive, curved shape of a canine tooth emerged. It was thick, ivory white, and undeniably ancient. It was the tooth of a hippopotamus. Think about that for a moment as you stand in the shadow of the National Gallery. Right here, in the heart of one of the most urbanized places on the planet, a massive 3-ton river beast once wallowed in the mud. This was not a stray animal or a lone traveler. This was its home. You can see the scene if you close your eyes. The stone buildings around you dissolve. The paved square turns into a lush, swampy riverbank. The Thames of 125,000 years ago was not the narrow, embanked river we know today. It was a sprawling, braided network of channels and marshlands that stretched across the entire valley. The water was clear and slow-moving, fed by a climate that was several degrees warmer than the one we live in now. You feel the humidity on your skin. The air is thick and sweet with the smell of rotting vegetation and blooming wildflowers. There are no buildings, only a vast expanse of grasslands and dense thickets of oak and hazel trees. And there, in a deep pool of water where the fountains of Trafalgar Square usually spray their plumes, you see them. A pod of hippos, their dark, wet backs breaking the surface of the water like smooth boulders. They grunt and huff, spraying mist into the warm air, their small ears twitching at the sound of dragonflies buzzing through the reeds. This was a subtropical London. It was a place where the winters never saw a frost and the summers were long and golden. But the hippos were not alone. As you walk further through this ancient version of the square, you might see a shadow moving through the trees near where the entrance to the Charing Cross tube station now sits. It is a straight-tusked elephant, an enormous creature that would dwarf the modern African elephants you see in documentaries. These giants stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder, their tusks long and spear-like, reaching out to graze on the high branches of the trees. The ground beneath you is a graveyard of these magnificent beasts. When the excavators dug beneath the square and the surrounding streets, they found more than just the hippos. They found the remains of narrow-nosed rhinoceroses, creatures that loved the warmth of the Ipswichian sun. They found the bones of giant deer with antlers that spanned the width of a small room. And perhaps most terrifyingly, they found the evidence of predators. You find yourself standing near the base of what will one day be Nelson's Column, but in this time you are standing on a kill site. In the tall grass, a pride of lions watches the herds of deer. These were not escapees from a zoo or a traveling circus. These were the cave lions of the Pleistocene, larger and more powerful than the lions of the Serengeti. Along with them were the spotted hyenas, whose powerful jaws could crack the thickest bones of an elephant. When archaeologists examined the bones found beneath Trafalgar Square, they noticed something chilling. Many of the bones bore the distinct marks of teeth. The hippos and the elephants that died on these banks were not always left to rot in peace. They were torn apart by scavengers, their remains scattered across the gravels and eventually buried by the shifting sands of the river. You might wonder how these animals got here. They did not have to cross the English Channel because, at that time, the Channel did not exist. Britain was a peninsula of mainland Europe, a vast, unbroken stretch of land that allowed the great migrations of the Pleistocene to flow freely from the heart of the continent. The lions and the hippos simply walked north, following the warmth as the ice retreated, claiming the Thames Valley as their own private paradise. It is a humbling thought to carry with you as you navigate the crowds of the modern square. We think of London as a triumph of human engineering, a place where we have paved over nature and asserted our dominance over the wild. We have built our monuments and our galleries, and we have laid down our tracks and our wires. But all of that is just a thin crust. It is a fleeting moment in the grand scale of the Earth's history. Beneath the layer of the 1950s, beneath the layer of the Victorians, and beneath the layer of the Romans, the hippo still waits in the dirt. It is a reminder that the world has been many different things before it became ours. The very ground you are walking on was once a place of tropical heat and predatory danger. The air you breathe was once filled with the calls of elephants and the splashing of river horses. The fossils found here are now tucked away in the drawers of the Natural History Museum, labeled and categorized. But their presence remains a ghost in the geography of the city. They tell us a story of a changing planet, of a world that breathes and shifts, heating up and cooling down over tens of thousands of years. They remind us that the climate we see today is only the latest version of a story that has been told many times before. As you stand here, looking up at the bronze lions, you might realize the irony of their placement. The sculptor, Edwin Landseer, spent years studying the anatomy of lions to make them look as regal and fierce as possible. He wanted them to represent the strength of the British Empire. But he likely had no idea that real lions had once prowled this exact spot, hunting real prey in the long grass of a wild and untamed London. The square is more than just a public space. It is a portal. Every time a new hole is dug for a new pipe or a new foundation, we catch a glimpse of the secrets held in the Pleistocene dirt. We are reminded that we are walking on the remains of a lost world. The hippos of Trafalgar Square are gone, but they are not forgotten. They are part of the deep fabric of this place, a silent, ancient foundation that supports everything we have built on top of it. You start to walk away now, heading toward the Strand or the Mall, but the feeling stays with you. You feel the weight of the deep time beneath your feet. You look at the gray stone buildings and you see the lush green jungle they replaced. You hear the roar of the traffic and you listen for the grunt of a hippo in the water. The city is a marvel, but the world beneath it is a mystery that is still being unraveled, one shovel full of dirt at a time. You leave the square behind, but you carry the secret of the hippo with you, a reminder that under the skin of the modern world, the wild past is never truly far away. You stand at the edge of the square, the roar of London traffic humming in your ears, and the grand facade of the National Gallery looming behind you. But as you turn toward the modest entrance of the Charing Cross Underground station, the air changes. You feel a cool, metallic draft rising from the earth, a subterranean breath that carries the scent of iron, old electricity, and a hint of damp stone. You begin your descent. Each step down the stairs takes you further from the sunlight and deeper into a labyrinth that has been carving its way through the belly of the city for over a century. This is not just a transit hub. It is a geological and engineering marvel, a tangle of iron and tile that mirrors the complexity of the square above. As you step onto the first landing, you are entering a space that was once a chaotic battleground of competing railway companies. In the early 1900s, the ground beneath your feet was a site of frantic ambition. You have to imagine a time when there was no unified London Underground map. Instead, there were separate tunnels owned by separate men, often ending just yards away from one another without a connecting passage. To your left, in 1906, the Baker Street and Waterloo Railway opened their station here, calling it Trafalgar Square. To your right, just a year later, the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway opened their own station, which they called Charing Cross. For decades, commuters had to surface, walk across the busy street, and dive back down into another hole just to change lines. You can still feel that fragmented history in the way the corridors twist and turn, following the ghost of old property lines and forgotten rivalries. You continue deeper, following the gentle curve of the tunnel. The walls here are lined with white and cream tiles, reflecting the dim electric light in a way that makes the passage feel like the inside of a great, clean bone. You are now beneath the very foundations of the fountains and the lions. Above you, thousands of tons of granite and water press down, but here the engineering of the Victorian and Edwardian eras holds the weight with effortless grace. You are surrounded by the London clay, a prehistoric blue-gray mud that is the secret hero of the city. Without this clay, the tube could never have been built. It is firm enough to stand without immediate collapse, but soft enough to be carved away by the hands of thousands of laborers. You imagine those men now, the navvies, working in the humid darkness by the light of flickering candles and early electric bulbs. You can almost hear the rhythmic clink of shovels and the hiss of the great head shield. This massive circular frame of iron was pushed forward into the clay, inch by inch, while men inside its protective ribs scooped out the earth. As the shield advanced, others followed behind, bolting together the heavy segments of the cast iron rings that form the tunnel walls. When you look at the circular shape of the tunnels today, you are seeing the direct footprint of that machine. You are walking through a hollowed-out needle that was threaded through the earth with surgical precision, avoiding the deep foundations of the monuments above and the tangled roots of the city sewers. As you reach the platforms of the Northern Line, you notice a change in the atmosphere. The walls are decorated with large, intricate murals that tell the story of the construction of the original Eleanor Cross, the medieval monument that gave this area its name. These murals, created by the artist David Gentleman, are a reminder that even in this high-tech environment, the deep past is always present. You see depictions of medieval stonemasons and horse-drawn carts, a stark contrast to the sleek silver trains that now rush past you. The wind picks up, a sudden, warm pressure that announces the arrival of a train. It is the piston effect, a phenomenon where the moving train pushes a column of air through the tight tunnel. You feel it against your skin, a physical connection to the movement of the city. But there is a secret part of this station that you cannot easily see. If you were to find the right door and speak to the right person, you might be led to a place where time has seemingly stopped. Beneath the active platforms of the Bakerloo and Northern Lines lie the ghost platforms of the Jubilee Line. In the 1970s, a massive expansion project saw the creation of a new terminus here. It was a flagship of modern engineering, opened with great fanfare in 1979. For 20 years, these platforms were some of the busiest in the station, decorated with bright colors and modern signage. But when the Jubilee Line was extended toward Stratford in the late 1990s, the route was changed. The tunnels were diverted south toward Westminster, leaving these platforms at Charing Cross a dead end. You imagine walking down those silent stairs now. The tiles are still there, the benches are still in place, and the maps on the walls still show the routes of 1999. It is a pristine time capsule, hidden just a few yards away from the bustling crowds. This silent station has found a second life as a movie set. When you see a chase scene in a Bond film or a tense encounter in a spy thriller set on the London Underground, you are often looking at these very platforms beneath Trafalgar Square. They exist in a strange limbo, perfectly maintained but never used by the public. You are standing above a stage that has hosted some of the biggest stars in cinema, all while the commuters above check their watches and wait for the next train to Camden or Elephant and Castle. The complexity of what lies beneath you is staggering. You aren't just in a subway station. You are in a multi-layered bridge. Beneath the square, the tunnels have to navigate the underwater geography of the city. Not far from here, the tunnels of the Northern Line actually pass underneath the bed of the River Thames. To achieve this, the engineers had to freeze the ground or use compressed air to keep the water from rushing in. You are standing in a dry, safe bubble in an environment that naturally wants to be filled with river water and mud. Every time you breathe the recycled air of the station, you are benefiting from a massive ventilation system that reaches up through hidden shafts in the buildings around the square, pulling fresh air from the surface and pushing out the heat generated by the trains and the thousands of human bodies passing through. You walk back toward the escalators, the mechanical hum of the moving stairs providing a steady bass note to the station's symphony. These escalators were themselves a revolution. When they were first introduced to the underground, people were terrified of them. There are stories of a man with a wooden leg being hired to ride up and down all day just to prove to the public that the moving stairs were safe. Today, you ride them without a second thought, but as you ascend, you are being lifted through several distinct geological and historical layers. You pass through the level of the modern sewers, the level of the Victorian gas pipes, and finally back toward the foundations of the world above. The Charing Cross connection is the heart of the square's hidden life. It is the reason the square feels so alive, even when it is empty of people. The constant vibration of the trains, a low-frequency thrum that you can feel in the soles of your shoes, is the heartbeat of London. It is a reminder that the city is a living organism with its own veins and arteries. The square is not just a flat piece of pavement for tourists to walk on. It is the roof of a vast, subterranean cathedral of iron and tile. As you reach the top of the stairs and the light of the square begins to bleed back into your vision, you take one last look at the tiles of the station entrance. You think of the millions of people who have passed through this portal, from the soldiers of the world wars who used these tunnels as deep-level bomb shelters, to the modern workers lost in their headphones. This space has been a sanctuary, a highway, and a battlefield. It has been shaped by the needs of the people above, and in turn it has shaped the way the city functions. Without this hidden world, the square would be a static monument, a relic of the past. But because of the tube, because of the Charing Cross connection, the square is a gateway to the entire city. You step out back onto the pavement. The transition is jarring. The quiet, focused intensity of the underground is replaced by the chaotic energy of the surface. You hear the cry of a street performer, the chime of a distant clock, and the splashing of the fountains. But you know now that the ground beneath you is not solid. It is a honeycomb. It is a masterpiece of human ingenuity that turned the dark, inhospitable clay into a vital artery. You walk away from the station entrance, but you carry with you the knowledge of the Shadow City. You understand that the grandeur of Trafalgar Square is only half the story. To truly know this place, you have to appreciate the iron ribs and the tiled veins that keep the heart of London beating, deep below the stone. You are standing at the very center of the world, or at least it feels that way as you find your footing on the gray granite of Trafalgar Square. The noise here is a constant, shifting wall of sound. You hear the rhythmic splash of the great fountains, the low, persistent hum of idling red buses, and the chatter of 1,000 different languages from people who have traveled across oceans just to stand where you are standing right now. Above you, the 4 great bronze lions sit in their eternal, watchful silence, guarding the base of Nelson's column. They look out over a city that is constantly moving, constantly evolving. But beneath your feet, something much older and much quieter is waiting. To understand what lies beneath these stones, you have to imagine that you possess a kind of historical X-ray vision. You have to look past the asphalt and the paving slabs, past the modern pipes and the vibrating tunnels of the Northern Line, and sink your mind into the dark, damp layers of the earth. If you could peel back the ground like a heavy carpet, you would see that you are standing on a graveyard, a marketplace, a swamp, and a prehistoric riverbank all at once. Let us start our descent by moving back only a few centuries. You are walking through the square in the early 1800s, before the great lions were ever cast in bronze. The ground beneath you feels different here. It is uneven, muddy, and crowded with the clutter of the royal mews. You can hear the ghosts of horses and the clatter of carriage wheels. As we sink further down, Through the Victorian brickwork, we encounter the foundations of the houses and shops that were cleared away to make room for this grand public space. You can almost smell the coal smoke and the horse manure of a London that was bursting at the seams. But as you descend deeper, the air grows cooler and the sounds of the modern city begin to fade away entirely. You are now moving through the soil that supported the medieval village of Charing. At this depth, you find the remains of everyday life from 700 years ago. You might stumble upon a discarded leather shoe, hardened by the London clay, or the shards of a green glazed jug that once held ale in a local tavern. This was a place of transit even then, a small cluster of buildings on the road between the commercial powerhouse of the City of London to the east and the Royal Palace of Westminster to the south. You continue to sink, passing through the dark, rich earth of the Middle Ages, until you reach a layer that surprised archaeologists only a few decades ago. You have arrived in the 7th century, the time of the Saxons. For a long time, historians believed that after the Romans left Britain, the area around Trafalgar Square was largely abandoned. They thought the people had retreated behind the old Roman walls of the city. But the ground beneath your feet tells a different story. You are standing in the middle of Londonwick. This was the Saxon trading port, a sprawling, busy settlement of timber huts with thatched roofs and dirt floors. As you walk through this ghostly version of the square, you see the post holes where those houses once stood. You see the pits where they threw their rubbish, full of fish bones and oyster shells. You find the loom weights they used for weaving and the delicate bone combs they used to dress their hair. It is a humble, earthy world compared to the grand stone facades above us today, but it was the true beginning of the London we recognize. These people were merchants and artisans, trading with the continent, bringing wine and silk to a town that was slowly waking up from the collapse of the Roman Empire. But the earth beneath Trafalgar Square holds secrets that are far more somber than the remains of Saxon houses. As you move toward the northeastern corner of the square, toward the elegant church of St. Martin in the Fields, the ground becomes crowded with the departed. You are walking through the great, hidden necropolis of the city. For centuries, this was the parish graveyard, and it was filled to the point of overflowing. When the square was being constructed in the 1830s, the workmen had to remove thousands of bodies to make room for the new layout. Imagine the scene as they dug into the earth. They found layers upon layers of coffins, stacked like cordwood in the damp soil. Many of these people were victims of the Great Plague of 1665. You can almost feel the weight of that history as you stand there. The church itself still sits atop a massive crypt, a vaulted underground world where the wealthy were once laid to rest in lead-lined caskets. Today, you can go down there and eat in the cafe, the smell of coffee and soup mingling with the cool, stony breath of the vaults. You are sitting just inches away from the people who lived and died in this neighborhood when it was still surrounded by green fields. But we are not done yet. We must go deeper still, leaving the world of human history behind and entering the realm of the deep geological past. We sink past the Saxon huts and the medieval graves, down through the layers of river gravel and into the thick, gray London clay. The temperature drops, and the silence becomes absolute. We are now 125,000 years in the past. This is perhaps the most incredible secret held by the ground beneath your feet. In the 1950s, when workers were excavating for the foundations of the buildings that surround the square, they found something that seemed to belong in a different continent entirely. Deep in the soil, they discovered the massive, fossilized bones of hippopotamuses, elephants, and lions. You must try to visualize this. Close your eyes and replace the image of Nelson's column with a wide, slow-moving river. The climate here was once much warmer than it is today, a lush, subtropical paradise. Where the National Gallery now stands, ancient herds of elephants once moved through the tall grass. Where you might wait for a taxi, a hippopotamus once wallowed in the muddy shallows of a prehistoric Thames. The very lions that sit in bronze on the surface are a strange echo of the real lions that roamed this very ground over 100,000 years ago. You are standing on a testament to the staggering scale of time. The earth beneath you is a thick, multi-layered book, and every inch of soil is a page. You have the modern tourists on the surface, the Victorian engineers just below them, the medieval monks and Saxon traders deeper down, and the prehistoric giants at the very bottom. All of them occupied this same small patch of land, never knowing what would come after them or what lay beneath them. As you begin your ascent back to the surface, you pass through those layers once more. You move past the bones of the mammoths, feeling the chill of the ancient river. You rise through the Saxon marketplace, hearing the phantom calls of traders in a language you can barely understand. You pass through the crowded silence of the plague pits and the bricked-up cellars of long-vanished houses. Finally, you break back out into the bright light of the present day. The roar of the traffic returns, and the spray from the fountains hits your face. You look at the lions again, but now they seem different. They aren't just decorative statues or symbols of naval victory. They are the latest markers in a story that has been written in the earth for 100 millennia. When you walk across the square now, you feel the vibration of the tube trains beneath your boots, but you also feel the weight of all those layers. You realize that the city is not just what you see on the skyline. The real London, the true London, is a vertical city. It is a tower of history that reaches down into the dark, holding onto its secrets until someone is brave enough to dig. Every step you take is on the shoulders of giants, both human and animal. You are a temporary visitor in a place that has seen everything from the birth of civilization to the roaming of prehistoric beasts. The lions know this, and as you stand in their shadow, now you know it too. The square is not just a place to stand. It is the lid on a treasure chest of time, 1,000 years of life, death, and survival, all resting quietly beneath the stones.